When I was a kid, we did not have a lot of money. I came from, a single parent home, and we spent a lot of our time thrifting before thrifting was a thing. So we
With design, things go cyclically, right? So there's this big resurgence in like mid-century modern, for example, and I think people are starting to get more of an appreciation for
the technical aspect of kitchen and bath lends itself so well to interior design because you have to have
it. Seems like common sense. It just like you start from this perspective of like top down, like what is your vision for the space, and then you put in the pieces afterwards, as opposed to like
at the end of the day, I'm not the one living in their home. They are. So if they're choosing a color I don't like, I'll find a way to work with it. If they're choosing a piece of furniture.
Welcome to this episode of The Furniture Economy, where we are building the most rigorous, honest conversation about how design, materials logistics, and consumer behavior are redefining the home industry and what leaders need to know to stay ahead. Today, we are joined by Sharon Sherman, CEO and founder of Time and Design. Sharon, thank you so much for coming on pod today, and we're looking forward to exploring your perspectives on the home furnishings industry and interior design.
Awesome. I'm glad to be here.
Excited to have you, Sharon.
Can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing? How did growing up in New Jersey and then Florida shape your early interest in design?
Ah, it's funny because when I tell you this story, you're going to say, how in the world did you ever get into design? So when I was a kid, we did not have a lot of money. I came from, a single parent home. And we spent a lot of our time thrifting before thrifting was a thing. So we would go around and find pieces of furniture and bring them home and strip them, repaint them. My mother was an amazing seamstress. So we would reupholster things. And I always liked to think that I was creative, although my mother insisted that I should be a gym teacher because she thought that was an easy way to have a good working benefits. But that was not in my future. So I actually used to make clothing out of bed sheets. I'd have fashion shows in the house, and I would constantly be, as I said, finding pieces of furniture, bringing them home, changing my room and things around. And then when it was time to go to school, I actually went to school to study what we in the day called commercial art, which was the advertising sector. Now you would call graphic arts. And after 2 years, I realized that I hated it. And I was like, great, I spent all this money on college to study something that I didn't really care for. And then a friend of mine said, well, you've been doing interior design your entire life. You just haven't realized it. Maybe you should look into interior design. And a friend of mine was going to a college in Westchester. I was living in northern New Jersey at that time. And I'm like, okay, let me look into this. And they took all of my credits and transfer. And I graduated with a degree in interior design. And I had worked for a large retail company who was very well known for their design system and their design, what we used to call center aisle. And they used to do little mini show houses within the store. And I thought, this is all great, but like, I'm not so sure that I just want to do furniture. I don't know that I just want to pick accessories. I don't know that I just want to do colors and things. Not to say that there's anything wrong with any of that, but I wanted something a little more technical. So when I graduated college, I got a job. I was very nervy because in the day, I'm a lot older than you guys are. And in the day, we had a thing called the yellow pages. So I would flip through the yellow pages and look for companies that I can send a resume to. And two of my friends actually worked in design for Prudential Insurance back then. They were headquartered in Newark. So I sent a resume to them. I sent a resume to a couple of interior design studios, to a lighting designer, and to this small kitchen design firm. I thought it was small in Ridgewood, New Jersey. So Charles, you know where Ridgewood is. And I sent 20 resumes. I got 5 interviews. I got 3 job offers. And I took the one in kitchen design because I thought, this is kind of fun. It's a little more technical. I like the idea of doing construction. And I just thought it'd be a perfect fit. Obviously, here I am many years later. And I worked for them for 20 years. I really got to learn all about construction at the time in the 80s, late 80s and early 90s. Multifamily housing was a really big deal. So I, in my early 20s, was handed this division by my boss. And he said, I want you to develop our commercial division, which is doing multifamily housing. And I thought, oh, okay. And I really learned everything there is to know about design and building from those early days. And then after 20 years, I realized it was time for me to get my own place, and Time and Place Design was born.
So after 20 years, you decided it's time to start my own business. Like, what specifically led you to make that transition?
So a couple of different things. I felt the company I was working for was getting really big. And one of the things that was really important to me was a one-on-one connection with my clients. I like taking the project full circle from initial design through if it's building an addition or just remodeling a space. But I wanted to do the cabinetry. I wanted to do the interior design. I wanted to do all of it. And that wasn't really something that the company was really doing. It was very male centric. So a lot of the time that promotions and things would be made, because that was at the time of the Me Too movement, I guess, which we've all learned about from politics these days. But I just realized that it was not what I wanted it to be anymore. That personalized, one on one, tailored sort of experience that I wanted to have with clients that I really got through the construction field, because when people were downsizing, moving to new homes, I would do every room in the house and I got to know them very, very, very well. And that's what I was looking for. So I surprised the daylights out of my boss when I said, I'm leaving. He was like, what?
Yeah,
What do you
yeah.
mean?
20-year tenure is no joke.
Yeah, it was like my midlife crisis. And I said to my husband, I'm going to start a new business. And he was like, really? I'm like, yeah. Goes, all right. And here I am 23 years later.
Yeah, with the plethora of experience too.
Yeah. And hopefully that still matters. I worry a lot that everybody's looking for the next trend, the next new thing, the young view. I mean, when you look at things in the industry, it's like 30 under 30, 40 under 40. And there's a lot of my contemporaries that are all like, what happened to 50 over 50? There's a lot of knowledge and experience here that I don't think is celebrated the way it should be in the design field. But we'll see.
Oh, that's a great point of view. And, with design, things go cyclically, right? So there's this big resurgence like mid-century modern, for example. And I think people are starting to get more of an appreciation for timeless design. Then, I think the play on name, like the play on words in your company's name is very apparent now. So I'm curious, like you had this central experience in like kitchen and bathroom. How does that lend to the current practices of the business today?
I like to say that we're a full service interior design studio. We specialize in kitchens, baths, millwork, and more. And so that's still my love. That's still my passion. Right now, I'm doing a 15,000 square foot home. So my contractor and I are really managing the whole project. There's 35 rooms. Along with Randy, world's greatest contractor, along with Randy, we manage this whole project. And it has been everything from framing to, insulation to steel to all of the construction aspects that go into it, HVAC, plumbing, and the interior design and the lighting and the interior finishes and the exterior finishes and buying all the furniture, and doing all the wall coverings and all the flooring and all the other things that go into it. And I think the technical aspect of kitchen and bath lends itself so well to interior design because you have to have processes. If you don't have processes in place in any business, not even a design business, I think that you really can suffer. And kitchen and bath lends itself to processes, even a little bit more than interior design does. And those two worlds for me have always been one. I know for many kitchen and bath designers are like, oh, no, I'm not doing furniture. And interior designers are like, oh no, I'm leaving the kitchen to the kitchen people, which I will tell you is one of the biggest insults you can ever say to somebody that, oh, you're a kitchen person. Because we're not, we're professional designers. And, we are rigorous in our education and our knowledge. And we know things about style. We know how to do color. We know how to do space planning. We know how to do textures and materials. And I think sometimes that's forgotten. So for me, I'm the best of both worlds because I can do both.
And I never thought of it that way, in that you have this technical aspect of putting a kitchen together in a way that like maybe the dining room or the living room doesn't require, right? You have to have knowledge of how the plumbing, the electrical is going to work, and then bringing that together in a cohesive space that looks and feels integrated with the rest of the home. And so being able to parse those disciplines together to create a entire, like you said, the 15,000 square foot home is really impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I love it. I love what I do. I think what really drew me to the kitchen and bath and millwork aspect is you can't make a mistake. I mean, an eighth of an inch is a lot and can throw so many things. You can't zhuzh a cabinet over. So I think that's a discipline that I think when you then bring that into the interior design space, it's a powerful combination of profession. And now that, NKBA is at High Point. And when I was down there, I saw Bill Darcy at the opening of the NKBA space over in Broad Hall. And I'm like, hey, Bill, congratulations. And he said, hey, you said 20 years ago that we should bring this together. He goes, it took us a little while, but we have. So I think it's amazing collaboration.
And do you think that the industry is trending more towards the integration of design with the rest of the home?
Well, I've always believed that the kitchen leads the design of the rest of the home because it interacts with so many spaces around it. So for me, it has never been a segmented space. And I think that's why, because I was an interior designer before I even learned really about the kitchen and bath business, my thought was always, how does that room interject its style into the spaces around it? And I think that in the last couple of years has really started to happen, as you know, especially with interior designers starting to say, hey, kitchens are a big part of the house. But you know, cabinetry goes into so many spaces. So you have a kitchen, okay, you might have a bar, you might have a pantry, you might have a butler's pantry. We have scullery kitchens now. A work from home space, a laundry room, a mud room, any sort of millwork paneling, a family room, a great room. You know, there's so many areas that are really, I just think, so well suited to the integration of both, that I think they're a necessary collaboration. I've actually started a little group. I was asked to start this group a few years ago when I spoke down at Universal the first time. And they're like, can't you just get us all together? And I'm like, well, let me start working on that. And it's finally kind of come to be. And now I've got architects who are saying to me, Sharon, this is such a great idea. You know, can I be part of your group? I'm like, that's really what it's about. It's about integrating all of these professions together so that we can work together instead of, well, the architects only do this part and the interior designer only does that part and the cabinet people only do this part. That it really should be a whole home experience and an integration of all those professionals. So check back with me in 6 months. We'll see how I'm doing with my group.
You know, to me, as someone that is new to the home furnishing interior design world, it seems like common sense. You know, it just like you start from this perspective of like top down, like what is your vision for the space, and then you put in the pieces afterwards, as opposed to like starting with the individual components. Why do you think that the industry did or has developed in the way that it has instead of taking this top down holistic approach?
You know, I think it's a bubble up. I really do. You know, people don't want to have to call three different people to do one job. And, you know, the interior designer generally is the pivot point for everything that goes on, right? Because we're really looking at how you're going to live in the space. And how you live in the space is going to affect how that home is built. It's going to affect how you use that home. From the moment you walk in the door, which door do you use all the time? How do you move through that house? How are you going to live in that house at all the different stages, whether it's your first home, an apartment, whether it's going to be you're moving up into another home, whether it's going to be you've added children, whether it's going to be that you now have maybe a multi-generational space, that you're building your dream home. And all of that really is centered around having everybody work together. Unfortunately, you know, a lot of what we see in this industry, and I hear it all the time, it drives me crazy, is that you'll say, well, we have a builder and we have an architect and we have somebody to do all the technology. And I'm like, that's great. What happened to the interior designer? Oh, well, they can come in later and just decorate. And I'm like, we do a heck of a lot more than decorating. I know things about my clients that nobody else knows. Personal things about how they live, right down to how they store things in their closet. Nobody else knows that. The builder doesn't know it. The architect certainly doesn't know it. The tech guy doesn't want to know it. You know? So it's an important, we are such an important component, which many times are left out. And then we are brought in and we'll say, like in this town, this condo that we're staying in, I walked in and I said to my husband, you know, we're moving the furniture, right? He goes, why? I said, this makes no sense. You can't watch a television. You're walking around furniture. There's no light here. And he just is like, all right, what do you want me to do? So we rearranged the furniture and he's like, you know, I don't even think of this stuff, but it's so much better now.
It makes it so much more livable with just a simple rearrangement of the space.
Yes. And the energy, the way the energy flows in the house. I mean, that's the other thing. Part of my, you know, I do energy work. It's not a big known part of my business. Timeless well-being is my energy work business. And I've been bringing that into the home environment my entire life. So it's just now that all of a sudden it's a little more socially acceptable. I think that has made a difference too, because the energy in your home, and I say this all the time, it's not just the way you feel when you're in that space, it's the way the space feels when you're in it, because we're all bringing something into that space. And I think that's the other aspect that hopefully this wellness bloom, I'm going to call it a bloom, not a boom, is going to learn to embrace. It's not just about using low VOC paint. It's not just about circadian rhythms, although those are important. There's more to it. And it's an innate, intuitive aspect that we all have capable of doing. It's just a matter of whether or not we realize that we have those.
Oh, I really like this perspective where, you think about how the person is going to live in the home, like with that end goal in mind, and then working backwards from there, like the building, the architecture, etc. And, I've had the situation where I've moved into a new space and I want to do something with it that's based on like my preferences on how to live, right? And I'm doing the design of the space, but just structurally, there are limitations on like what the layout of the room is, or layout of this apartment is, and I feel handcuffed, right? And so there's things that I want to accomplish, but I could not do it without going a step further down, right? Do you encounter that in your work? Like maybe you're not working on new construction, but you're coming into an existing space, there's no remodeling, you're just doing a design job and feeling like there are limitations in what you can do.
Any limitation can be overcome with the right solution. So I say every solution starts with a conversation. And the conversation has to be how you want to live, what the conditions are that exist, and how we can adapt those conditions to how you want your space to be. There's always a solution. And I think many times what clients don't necessarily see is that they have a very specific view of this is how I think this should be, and this is how I want to put it together, and this is how I live. But designers come with a 360 view or the 10,000-foot view. Now, it used to be that as the crow sees, now it's as the drone sees, right? Because we will look at things in a slightly different way and can bring a different perspective. And, my client on this large home, I love them to pieces because she's looking for an experience, right? And the greatest compliment she ever gave to me, and she was speaking to somebody else in my presence, is that Sharon can take the infinite possibilities in the universe and distill them down to 3 perfect choices. Even with those 3 choices, if it's one that I only half am committed to, she can still pivot around it to make it work to what I want my experience to be. And that's what a designer can do. We're not given that credibility. We're not given those kudos to say, yeah, designers can do that. We all do it at a different level. I've been doing it a long time, working with people for a long time. I've seen so many conditions and situations. I travel. My husband's, European. So I've traveled all over Europe. I've traveled all over this country. I've traveled a lot of places. And I think that really lends to having an open eye in how you can create a design solution that might be a little more fluid. And that comes with age and wisdom and experience.
Absolutely. Sharon, quick question here from my end, kind of tangenting off what we were just talking about. So, what you do is you've developed it into an art and a craft, right? You're one of the lucky few who have been able to take a passion, turn that into a career. Now, are there any challenges where you have to remember that you're still trying to run like a profitable design firm with high expectations, high demand, especially from the client landscape? Is there a balance that goes with doing what would be the most aesthetically pleasing thing, what makes the most sense, maybe your vision of something, while balancing the aspect of remembering that you are running a business and you can't acquiesce to every single one of your clients' demands?
So I personally believe that luck is a 4-letter word. Yeah, I have been very blessed to have a lot of opportunities, but I've worked really hard for those opportunities. I have honed my knowledge. I have more letters after my name than anybody deserves to have. And I'm not curing cancer. I cannot solve world hunger. I cannot fix climate change, but I can make differences in the way people live. But I love the business of the business. And I literally just wrote a blog, just wrote a LinkedIn post, and it's going to be up on Substack probably in January. That's really talking about how you keep a business running, right? When clients are a little less cavalier in the way they want to invest their money in projects. I have definite sense of trust with my clients that they know that I'm going to spend their money in the best ways. And if they really want something, I'm going to tell them all the pros of it and all the cons of it. And then it's up to them to decide. And, at the end of the day, I'm not the one living in their home. They are. So if they're choosing a color I don't like, I'll find a way to work with it. If they're choosing a piece of furniture, and I just had this, my client fell in love with this oversized chaise that is out of a beautiful curly goat fabric. And she goes, I don't know where you're putting this, but we're buying that. And I'm like, okay. So I had to quickly in my head say, what are the 6 different places in this house that this thing could go? And I'm like, okay, it could go here. It could go here. It has possibilities for there. I said, you're making my job really hard, but it's my job to find a place to put that piece of furniture that she really likes. There was something else she wanted to buy. And I said, you know what? I'm sorry. I have to say no. And she's like, really? I said, yes. But you know what? If you really like it, once we get the majority of the pieces set in the house, if you really like it, we can always get it. And she's like, okay, that's fair. So I think that's what's going to be important, because you don't want somebody to spend $10,000 on a piece of furniture that's not going to work, right? And if my clients are relying on me to have that honesty with them, I'm going to have it and they're going to know it. I call it tough love. I'm like, sometimes I'm going to say no to you. And my clients, they're heavy hitters in the business world. They can have anything they want and they are not used to people saying no to them. So I have been willing to say, I don't really say no, but they're funny because now they're like, I know when you don't like something. I'm like, poker face. They go, no, usually say, that's lovely, but I think there might be a better option. Or, yeah, and they get to know my language of when I think something's not in their best interest. And sometimes they want it anyway, and I got to figure out how to make it work. Or I say to them, I'm telling you right now, it's not going to work. So you better have a relative who's going to love it. that's that's probably the best way. But my contractor and I are very careful in how we spend our clients' money. We're not going to do things just because we could do it and make a dime on it, because that's not what we do. And we want our clients to come back. We want our clients' friends to come back. We want to be successful, but we also want to create rooms that people really love. And that's part of the ethics of my business. And that's really important. And every single person that I work with needs to share that ethics value detail in their business. Otherwise, we don't work with them.
Makes sense. No, I mean, I think that's something that clients learn, or, your clients learn to come to value out of people that are designing their homes or important aspects of their life, is like having the trust in not only you completing their vision, but maybe if they have gaps that they don't know about, that they have full faith in, giving you their time and money to do that. Last question before I hand it over to Charles. Obviously, we're in a rapidly changing world. You work in a space, kitchen and bath, where there's innovation's always taking place, right? And there's still innovation gaps you see in different areas of the world. I mean, in terms of future signals that you're seeing in design that you think brands and furniture makers should prepare for in the next 20 years, and that can be, any signals, what would be like one or two that you kind of see forthcoming that people need to prepare for any changes coming?
Well, I think we need to get away from this fast fashion concept of furnishings. Like, what are we doing with all this stuff? The construction industry is the biggest contributor to, landfills. Like, why do we just tear things down? Let's build things of quality that, can evolve. I have one client, the first job I ever did with my contractor, it was the time that dark cherry kitchens were in. We did a beautiful dark cherry kitchen for her, and she had all the latest appliances. And then I usually say 10 to 15 years is usually the lifestyle of a kitchen. And she came to me and she said, look, this is still the best layout for my space, but what can we do to change things up? And I said, what do you want? She said, well, I really like something brighter and lighter. So, we repainted her cabinets and we turned her wooden hood into something that looked like a cool metal hood. And now let's fast forward another 6 years. And she said, I think I need another upgrade. So we changed her countertops. We put in a new sink. We upgraded her appliances, because that's really where the technology has changed, right? The materials that they're using. And I think we have to be willing to work that way. Technology is growing so quickly that it needs to be something that is also usable. There's a lot of technology out there that I'm like, I just don't know how to use it. And I'm not a stupid woman. I mean, so I think we have to be careful that we do not allow technology to overrun the human centric element of design. I think we have to be really careful with AI. I speak on the topic of AI and how it's redefining interior design. To this point, although it's changing every day, the human connection is still what's most important. And I know there's some weird things going on out there with AI that people are doing that are just kind of like, I don't know what to make of it. If we stay rooted in humanity and we as designers can choose to do that, I think that is something that is going to be very important. Making things easier. The most important thing we can't recreate is time. No one can build more time. So if we can figure out, for busy people that are working, that have children, that want to have more family time together, working technologies in there are going to allow that to happen, making cooking easier, making cleanup easier, quieting down the noise in our homes. Sound is a design element. We don't really consider it as a design element often enough. So being able to consider the sound quality of the products that we're working with, really easy closing cabinets, easy closing doors, lighting controls that will allow you to subtly change schemes, sound control so that it's not just blaring all the time out of one, out of one speaker, allowing us to still converse. And that I think is going to be super, super important.
Absolutely. There's a level of thoughtfulness when you're inhabiting a space that, like, the difference is in the degrees in terms of like the practical implications, like this button to turn off all the lights, or another that allows to bring in like reading light or ambient light, like, and you don't notice it until you've experienced the difference, right? Like being in a really well designed space versus just like your average, whatever put together. This is a great segue into one thing I was really curious about, which is your concept of timeless luxury. I see this like in a lot of your writings on your website, et cetera. Maybe you could take a moment and just tell us about the principles of your design modality.
So, luxury is a word that's used a lot. I think it has been diluted in its value. Everything is luxury. I was walking through a discount store yesterday and they had a whole thing with Chanel bags. And I'm like, that's funny. I almost took a picture of it. So, like, in a discount store, I think we have been so inundated with this concept of influencers and, we want what somebody else has because they have it and we want what they have and we want to live their way. They're not. You're just because you buy that thing, you're not going to be that person. You're not going to live the way that they live. And for me, timeless luxury is about creating a space that's going to make a difference in your life, not because you own something that's got some label on it, but because it's going to give you more time. It's going to give you the ability to stay in your home, depending on what age you're at, that you want to be able to live in. Somebody that maybe has physical limitations, it's going to be a luxury of being able to be in your home and to have independence. That's what luxury is really all about. It's not the latest fad. It's the things that are going to affect you personally that's going to make a difference in your life long term, not just for the next 2 days, 2 weeks, or a year, when whatever that latest flash is gone and now you're looking for your next hit, right? They talk about it as somebody who needs that hit of excitement, whether you're an adrenaline junkie or, whether you just long to be outside in the fresh air or whatever it is that you long for, right? Our home should be able to give us some of that without having to constantly look for the next new thing. So timeless luxury for me is something that is going to be long lasting. That's not just going to break down. That's not going to become an object that you stick in a box. So many people say, oh, I'm getting older. And because I have a lot of clients who are downsizing and they're like, I have all this stuff, my kids don't want it. And I'm like, well, why do you have it? And they said, well, at the time it seemed like a good thing to buy. And I keep saying to my younger son, I have a 32-year-old and a 30-year-old, and the younger one likes to shop. And I said to him, every time you go to buy something, say the word to yourself, house, because he really wants to buy a house. I'm like, you don't need that thing. If you really want the house, think about what's important to you and what's going to make a difference in your future. So for me, that's what timeless luxury is all about. It's buying quality products. It's buying things that can adapt to the next, I hate the word trend, but to the next latest thing that everybody wants. Like, how can what we're putting into our clients' homes create longevity that's still stylish and intuitive and functioning and tailored just for us? So that's really what timeless luxury is about.
Interesting. So, I mean, this maybe is not an exact parallel, but I just had this thought recently. I've been traveling for 2 years as like a digital nomad, also running this company. At first, when you start traveling, you get to a new country and you want to do all the things. You want to like see all the sights, do all the touristy things. But after you've been on the road for so long, like these events, like the tours, et cetera, they start to blur together, and there are only so many Roman Colosseums you can see, Eiffel Towers you can see before it starts to lose meaning and effect. And time for me, just alone or with my thoughts or with people I care about, is the true luxury. I literally just had this thought unrelated to our conversation. And would you say it's something similar, like in terms of your design thinking? It's not about chasing the trend, but it's really thinking about like what is the most important to you in your life and what's actually giving you fulfillment in your life and integrating that into your space.
What grounds you? What is that true root of joy and happiness? We get so many things and then we find out we don't have any more space for our things and we're still searching for that. George Carlin many years ago did a great routine about traveling. You're talking about travel. He said, we put all of our things into a suitcase. I don't know if you guys remember this, but we put all your things into a suitcase and you go someplace and you're there. And then somebody says, hey, let's go on this little side trip. He said, he would say, now you got all your stuff, but you can't bring as much stuff. So you got to take some of your stuff out and leave it behind. And it becomes a total panic, and trying to figure out what stuff to take. So you whittle your stuff down and you go on this trip. And then they say, well, we're going to go someplace else, but you can bring even less. And now like panic sets in because you're like, what am I going to take? What am I going to leave? Completely missing the point that the journey is really what's important, not the things that you're carrying with you. That's what I think is important in people's homes. This couple that we just did, so we did their kitchen. Of course, I started knocking down walls, and then we did their family room, and then we did a bathroom on the first floor. We took a big pantry walk-in closet and made their bathroom a little bit bigger. Then we're doing the living room, and then now we're doing their primary bath. And yet there's a lot of pieces from their home that really had sentimental value to them. And I said, well, let's use them. Were they things that I would have chosen? No. But when they look at those things, it creates the warm fuzzies, right? Or it's like people talk about getting goosies, right? It's the warm fuzzies inside that tell the story of who we are. And the story of who we are is a compilation of all the things that we've experienced through life and our aspirations for who we want to be next. And that is the root of what I believe is so important in design. For you, you've seen yourself as you travel, you see different cultures, you see different places. You look at who you were before you left on that trip and all of the exciting things you were going to go and do, and you realize the most important part of your trip was you. And that realization, I think, is going to happen more and more with your generation, with my kids, those kids in their 30s and moving forward. They've watched this Wolf of Wall Street attitude of you have to have everything. And I think people still do aspire to it, but look at how many people that have everything really have nothing, and at the end of the day, they're not necessarily happy. And I think this whole sense of self-fulfillment in a way beyond just tangible things is slowly but surely taking place. It's going to take a long time. I'm not saying that people are not going to go out there because they all want the latest bag or the latest shoes. I see it all the time. And what I find interesting is that latest thing may not be the perfect fit for them. And you can see, especially with women's shoes, like they're teetering around in uncomfortable shoes and you just know that they're going to take their shoes off the first chance they get, but they look really good when they're on, right? What is that meaning? That's not really providing a sense of value and worth. It's just saying, hey, I'm buying this thing that I probably going to have to, forego something else much more important like rent or food to be able to have. And I think when that clicks in people's minds, it's a big turning point for people personally.
It's interesting that you are you see this as like a generational difference in perspective as well. Do you think that like people in our generation, we're millennials, are more prone to like comparison due to social media and like chasing material things compared to, let's say the generations before us?
Well, my generation, because I'm probably as old as your parents, our whole thing was being successful in creating life for our kids, that they were going to be able to not have to do the things that we did. And I think in some way we did a little bit of a disservice because we did not allow our kids to experience some of the things that we did. I worked 2 part-time jobs and went to school full time. I've always had 2 jobs for almost as long as I've lived, it's this scarcity attitude. But my kids are much more about wanting to experience things in a different way. Travel is very important to them. My older son, like they live in a townhouse that they don't own. They're like, yeah, maybe we want to own a house. I don't know if I want to be tied to having to take care of it. I'd rather just call the association up and say, hey, can you trim the bushes and clear off the deck and do those things? Because it'll leave them more time to experience the things that they want to experience. I think that they're, in some cases, maybe a little bit more willing to wait a little bit longer for things because they really want to have the experience aspect of it first. On the other hand, I also see families. I have young families that are getting married super young and having children and, developing that home base. So I think it's how you're raised. I think it's what you are brought to expect or offered to think about, and the more you have time to think about what's important, I think it changes your perspective on what you need and what you don't need to be happy.
And do you think this generational shift in values has implications? What do you think the implications are for how you design the home then?
Well, I know for my kids, they love vintage stuff. I go vintage shopping with my daughter-in-law all the time. She's like, well, you'll never guess what I found. I love to do that. And I think, shopping vintage for me is fun. When I was at High Point, I brought some friends down who, again, are all probably around your age. They're designers. And we went to some of the showrooms. And then I said, we're going to go someplace else now. Like, where are we going? going? I'm like, we're going to some vintage shops. Oh my God. They were like kids in a candy store. They're like, this is great. And they were buying all these cool pieces because it had meaning, and they don't want their homes to look like everybody else's homes. They don't want to buy that sectional that their four friends also have. They want it to really be a reflection of who they are. And that gives me hope for the design world. It really does. That realization that, we want our homes to reflect our story. And again, it's experience, it's where you come from, it's what your realities are. And everybody's reality is different, right? Everything, everywhere, all at once. Like, what is the reality? It changes often. And we have a very interesting influx. I was on a panel a couple weeks ago all about Made in America. And there were products that were made in the US. And, the question to me was, what does Made in America mean to you? And I said, well, I'm going to look at the audience. The audience was such a mixture of people who come from all over the world. I mean, I'm looking at you two. Look at the three of us. Like, we couldn't be different enough, right? And I said, that is Made in America. There are people that have come here from all over the world that are making products here, and that's really what it's about. It's an international attitude that I think is developing. And they were all young. There was very few people my age that was there. I felt like I was talking to my kids, a whole assortment of them. But it was really interesting to see. And I think it's an evolving world. It's a changing landscape. I think the shifts that are happening is because there's so much that is being brought into the design space with so many different perspectives, which I think is amazing because that's what makes the world go round, right? It's that spark of inspiration. It's that conversation that sparks the solution that allows us not to have everything look the same. Like, I'm so glad white and gray kitchens are gone. It's just like everybody wanted that white and gray kitchen. I used to say to people, why do you think somebody else wants to live in this? Well, because it's the latest thing. I'm like, stop. And a client was selling their home. She said, oh, but everything in here looks like my taste. I'm like, but you have good taste. And she kept wanting to remodel things and I wouldn't let her. And her husband's like, thank you. Their house sold in 6 hours with multiple bids. And people came in and said, this is so cool. It doesn't look like any other house that we've been in. And Billy looked at me and he's like, thanks, Sharon. Like, you're welcome. I think people want an identity. I don't think this homogenized overall view of everything is what people want. I think they want something they want to feel part of something, and everybody will find their own little niche of who they're going to be part of. But I do think that what's important is shifting. Hopefully I'll be alive long enough to see it.
I mean, the shifts are happening faster and faster. I think in 2025 compared to even 10, 15 years ago, there's not just a huge diversity of perspectives and values, but how quickly we see turnover between like trends and things happening in like the design discourse. And so, and I think that's good because it creates a discourse, and like you need that discourse in order to start figuring out what really is working for people and what's not. But in that process, there's a lot of noise. And what would you say, look, drawing on your experience and background, is the best way to stay grounded in an environment that's extremely noisy?
The two greatest emotions, fear and love. So if you can stay grounded with what's important to you, if you have a set of values, that's the one thing. Like, I don't want to say march to a different drummer because that's probably not true, but I've always trusted my heart to listen that way. What should I do? Where should I go? You asked me, how did I create a successful business, right? It was really trusting my instinct of being able to shut all that noise and that chaos out. And I think what's happening, especially with technology and AI, I mean, every day you hear thousands of people are getting laid off, right? How that's going to change work. I think we have to focus on what we can bring to the table that's different. And we have more power than we allow ourselves to realize. We think that we can't do anything to change what's happening around us, but we really can. We have power in our purchasing. We have power in our vote. We have power in our voice to speak truth. And I think that's really how you cut back some of that noise. You don't just let it keep happening around you and you're constantly inundated with all of this stuff that isn't right. I mean, you have to be willing. I say it to women all the time, like, stand in your power. Sorry, guys. Stand in your power and don't be afraid to speak your voice, to speak your truth, because you send that out in the universe and the universe is there. That energy is all around you and you're going to find somebody else that has that shared commonality, that has that shared vision, that has that shared idea. And once all those little individual parts start to come together, it becomes very powerful.
Staying true to yourself. And one big component of your design philosophy through the ages has been this connection to like wellness. We had talked briefly about like Reiki and energy healing. What relation, like, can you explain like how that impacts some of the work that you're doing today?
So people will say to me, I don't know what you did here, but my house feels different. Doesn't look different. I feel different when I come into it. The house feels different. We were working on a project, a repeat client, and they wanted to do their primary bath. And I'm like, okay. So we started working on it. And their son in law, who was 33 years old, became ill. And through the project, he continued an unfortunate decline. And the whole time that we are doing all of this, my client said, I'm so glad that you're here. You're helping me stay grounded. You're helping me deal with all of this emotion. And I literally went through a grieving process with them through our whole remodel. And every single thing that we put into that space was very carefully chosen. He retired, he's a great photographer. I said, give me some of your photographs. That's what we use as the inspiration for colors and materials and locations. You know, we have a freestanding tub that's sitting on top of pebbles because one of the photographs that he loves so much is a very bucolic view of a babbling brook running through the woods. And so we have this large tub that's a massage tub that has aromatherapy, that has color therapy in it, aromatherapy, and it's sitting on this, you know, shaped kind of floor that has these pebbles, and then the tile that's around it, you know, almost feels like sand and water. And the colors that we used into it were very representative of this beautiful mountainous background. And he said to me afterward, he said, if I didn't have you and this process, I don't know what we would have done. So the universe put me there at that time with them to have that, you know, to be able to work on that. And he says to me all the time, he goes, I'm using my tub every day. You know, it has made such a difference. It has really allowed us to deal with our grief, the sensing of everything that you put in here, the materials that our feet touch, that our hands touch. I have crystals in there. All of it has really played into a healing process for them. That's what wellness and design is about. You know, it's not putting, you know, a red vase in that corner. It's not, you know, just doing this. It's not doing that. It's taking the whole environment and considering how it's going to impact the people that are in it.
In a sense, like a space physically could be very similar to another, but energetically totally different. That's like very hard for me to like.
It's very Eastern Asian. Come on.
Feng shui, yeah. Even though I am Eastern Asian, like I would say I'm much more like analytical. You know, like what I see is like my reality, right? But it's not to discredit the idea that there is energy in spaces that make a difference.
There's energy that we've realized. I think Eastern medicine has been very involved with that. You know, that's where Reiki started. You know, herbology came from, you know, from an Eastern mentality. Although I will say in Southern America, you know, that whole culture has also worked into the wisdom of elders and getting back to nature and doing all of these things. I heard it once said that like the very first interior designers were actually the cave people because they were drawing, you know, drawing on the inside of their caves and writing, you know, creating pictorially what their day-to-day life is. I think we just have to be willing to be a little more open to the things that are around us. That's not quite so much of this analytical nature, because you're not as analytical as you think you are, because you know the space you're in doesn't feel quite right. You're just not quite sure how to make it feel right. That's not being analytical. That's feeling with something beyond your tangible senses. So I think, again, and I said it before, you go back to, you know, when something feels right. And I use this. So here's things I've talked about in presentations. If you go to a big space, take a movie theater, and you walk down the aisles, even though nobody goes to movie theaters anymore, but even if it's a conference, the first thing you do when you walk in, you don't just walk in and go and sit down. You walk in and you kind of look at the space, right? What are you looking for? I don't know, right? But you're going to go in and you're going to sit somewhere. And sometimes you'll look and you'll kind of look at the people that are there and you go, I don't know, I think I'll sit here. And then you sit down and you're in your own kind of space. You're like, this feels really good. Then somebody else comes in and sits near you. And now all of a sudden you're like, ooh, this doesn't feel good anymore. And you'll move to a different space. Or you'll say, wow, I'm in the best spot in this room. What is that? Are you thinking those things? No, you're experiencing them. And that's what I think a wellness aspect of design and an intentional design is really all about, right? It's feeling beyond what you're just seeing and touching. A flower doesn't have to think to turn its face to follow the sun. It does it automatically. And we have the ability to do that. When I'm in Manhattan, very often I'll be walking someplace and I know I have to go down the street and I'm like, I'm going to go another block or two. And I used to pass that off as like, one day I was in the middle of a gunfight in a parking garage. I was like, it was crazy. It was in the 90s and the city was still a little nuts. But I pay attention to that now. If I meet somebody and I'm like, yeah, like there's a connection here, I will absolutely work with that. If I meet somebody and I'm like, oh, this doesn't feel good, I'll be very polite, but I will not explore expanding that relationship. Make sense?
Yeah, no, I mean,
Definitely.
one thing I relate that to is like cognition is last layer of intelligence, right? It's like mostly centered in prefrontal cortex, and that's like the very last thing to develop in the mammalian brain. And so you have like millions of years of evolutionary substrate that cognition is built on top of. And those are like the feelings that you have, right? And so like the amygdala and like your emotions and those are there for a reason, right? Evolution is survival of the fittest. And so it's wise to pay attention to those things. And making that connection to design and your home is just something I've never really even thought of before. So
It'll make a
And
difference.
Sharon, I loved you sharing about like the energy balance coming into design and homes and even in places like movie theaters. I mean, what you're speaking about, something as you had mentioned, has been practiced for thousands of years in Indian culture. There's this thing called Vastu, where it's all about energy balance and basically bringing the house, the home, if you think about it, it's a system, right? Architecture and design to kind of bring it into harmony, to harmonize it with the human like dwellings, the beings in that building to optimize the positive energy. And like it's not just rubbish. So ways people think about it, there's a lot of science behind it, right? Certain rooms like kitchens have a different purpose than master bedrooms or guest bedrooms, right? So there's this concept where the kitchen should always be in the southeast or the northwest. The master bedroom should be the southwest. You should have the most amount of windows facing towards the sunrise, things like that. So it's a mix of not just aesthetics but also functionality. Like depending on the individuals in those homes, right? They'll have different things. Maybe certain colors should be portrayed more. If you have someone who's hot-headed, right, you require cool colors. If someone's a little more introverted, have a little warmer, brighter colors in those homes. And there's so much real science to that. And that just kind of goes along. I honestly tie that back to, I think this generation came more experiences, being a little more in tune with the experience as opposed to the maximum amount of things. What is it? Get something that optimizes your feelings, right? The quality behind it. And I think that's something that I have just seen change from when I was a kid walking into homes that were built, by people who were in the 50s or 60s traditional into then the contemporary modern design open layout element to it. Like if there's anything I can kind of share to you that I think is something that I've learned from a young age is that like you've heard the term that a home, you have a house and the people make the home. The space you live in defines your life. You need good energy. That's the people around you and where you're living. And that's just so true. And that is something that I think you have incorporated into. You were almost a bit ahead of your time, if I had to say. Not calling you old by any means, but you were definitely ahead of your time in that.
Thank you. I appreciate that more than you realize because look, we created these boxes, right? After World War II. I mean, I can even go back farther if you've ever gone any of the tenement tours down in New York City, right? When people were coming to this country and we kind of gave up designing homes. We created places to live, right? So it was all of these big boxes that were put together that all were the same. Why? Because it was easier to build them, and then I think of Long Island, all the developments that went up out there where every house was exactly the same, and maybe changed the color of the shutters, but it was all the same because it was the easiest way to mass produce housing. And you're starting to find it now. I mean, my kids live in Charlotte, and I drive around and I look at all of these buildings that they're putting up, and it's like one set of massive buildings after another. But what's shifted a little bit is that although they all look the same, they're bringing in this aspect of being able to live, work, and play, right? So you've got stores, you've got retail, you've got entertainment. You yourself said it, you're all remote, right? So you're all working someplace else so that you're working in your home, probably, but then you also have the ability to have a community in and around you. And that's really, I think, one of the things that's changing. I think it's in California, there's a community where you don't need a car. Like everything is within like walking or bicycling distance. And, you see these developments that are being put up. I'm down here. You can go anywhere on this island on a bike. You don't ever have to get in a car and go anywhere. So I think that's that's a shift that's happening. Charles, you talked earlier about shifts that are going on. And I think that is a shift that's happening. People want community. People have been so disconnected from each other and, so put into a little box. Like, this is your box and that's your box and that's your box, and if your box and my box don't look alike, then we're not the same and we hate each other. And I think we're trying to really overcome that, and I hope that it continues to happen. I like being around different people. I think it's so much more interesting to be able to talk to people who have different perspectives and bring different things in, and I hope that's where it's all going. I said, once again, look at the three of us. We could not be more different, right? That's what's really cool about this, and that you're doing the job of bringing a different perspective out there. And I thank you guys for that, because you're not doing the same thing that everybody else is doing. So you should be pretty proud of yourselves that you were able to bring a new conversation to, an old time, goes back to the cave people, to an old time profession.
Absolutely. And, I see so much potential for how we thinking, being thoughtful about the design of our homes, improving the quality of life for people, and then even more broadly, society at large. I think you're exactly right. Like, we live in an era where people feel very disconnected. They are able to peek into the lives of other people on social media and have less human to human connection. And these spaces like home or even commercial spaces where we're congregating and able to interact with people that are meaningful to us or even strangers, that's really the locus of like what the new human experience is going to be like. Sharon, we're at time. I want to thank you so much for coming on the pod today, sharing your perspectives. It's very clear to me after our conversation that your wisdom is not something to be taken lightly. You've brought such a high level, analytical, but also philosophical thought process to your work, and really inspiring and a great learning experience just to be able to talk to you today.
Oh, thanks, guys. I got something from you too. So, that's what conversation is all about. And that's what bringing people that you think probably are so completely different, they're really not. We're all the same when it comes to our interactions and the way that our bodies work and our brains work. So that's the human connection.
Absolutely. And we'd love to keep the conversation going into the future as well.
You know how to find me.
Thank you so much, Sharon. It was a pleasure speaking with you.